welcome to Inside of New England's Therapeutic Talk. Please like, subscribe, and comment below. Today we'll be talking with Joshua Shea, who is a recovering pornographic addict and author of Porn and the Pandemic, How 3 Months in 2020 Changed Everything. He is also the author of The Addiction Nobody Will Talk About, How I Let My Pornographic Addiction Hurt People and Destroy Relationships, and a co-author of He's a Porn Addict, What Now? Since 2018, Joshua has been in more interviews about pornographic addiction than anybody in the world. To date, he has appeared on over 175 podcasts, television, and radio shows, using the wealth of research and personal story to promote the ideals that porn addiction spans all demographics, and those with the problem should seek help before it's too late. Hi, I'm Candace, and you're watching Inside of New England's Therapeutic Talk. I am here with a guest today, and we're going to be talking about porn addiction and a book that he wrote. So I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Joshua Shea. I am an author and an educator in the field of pornography addiction, and I've actually written 3 books about it. And then I do some coaching and advising both with addicts and their partners. I do have an online course as well, and I will be doing a TED Talk towards the end of the year here in 2020. So I'm just trying to get the word out there and tell people that they need to be more educated both about pornography and about pornography addiction, which I think pornography can lead to if we're not educated about it.
Right. What do you think we can do to help people right now with this?
Well, the numbers are kind of scary. If you look at what I don't share a ton of stats anymore. I used to be all about that, but then we had the coronavirus hit, and that has basically kept people at home for 6, 7 months and kept people in front of their computers. And if you look at individual pornography sites at their statistics, they have absolutely blown up this year in usage. For instance, OnlyFans, which has been the one that has really blown up over the last year, which is a kind of a do-it-yourself porn site, which they have gone from 8 million subscribers to 50 million subscribers in 2020.
Wow.
They have gone from having 300,000 people creating pornography to their site to over 1 million people creating pornography for their site in 2020. So it's absolutely exploding this year, specifically because of the pandemic. And the scariest statistic that I still do share, even though I'm sure it's low at this point, is that in late 2017, an organization called the Barna Group, which is just one of those statistical creation organizations, they interviewed thousands of men specifically about pornography, and they found in the 18 to 30-year-old age group that 33% of men said that they either have a problem with pornography or they have a full-on addiction to it. Now, that's 1 out of 3 men under the age of 30 who believes they have a problem with pornography. If we don't start taking care of this, this is going to explode even further into something much worse, because these guys are eventually going to be 40 and 50 and 60. And if we don't stop men joining that organization of being porn addicts, we are going to be in a very unhealthy sexual place come 20, 30 years from now, as more women and other demographic groups join these essentially straight white men who have this pornography addiction. And we need to take care of this. It is the numbers, like I said, I don't trust them anymore because I think they've exploded. And because of the nature of the content of pornography, it's one of those things that nobody really wants to talk about.
Right. Yeah. What do you think with younger people than 18?
Well, I think that the way that we can actually fight this is by going and dealing with our younger men. The number one question that I get from people is, it's just pornography. Who's really getting hurt by watching it, and
Right.
and it's like, well, I understand that question, um, and I have ultimately two answers for it. First is that at this point I have read probably over 100 studies about pornography
Hmm.
and pornography addiction, whether it's usage or what it does to partners or what it does to marriages or children. In all of these different studies that I've read, I've never seen a conclusion that said pornography is a good thing. It's always a negative thing when it's studied. If you can point me to the one study that says pornography is a good
Right.
thing, let me know because I want to read it. So the science thus far, the study thus far, is unanimous that pornography is a negative thing. What really drove this point home to me was in a presentation I gave. The last one I gave before COVID locked everything down
Hmm.
was at a college here in New England. To a woman's sexual health group at a health center, probably about 15, 16 women, typical college age, 18 to 21 or so. A couple faculty members were there, and I gave my typical presentation with the stats and stories and whatnot. We got to the Q&A part at the end, and I said to uh, I said to everybody, what are your thoughts? And one woman, probably 19 or 20, raised her hand and said, I don't like to have sex with virgin men anymore. And I said, okay, that's an interesting thing to tell me, but what does that have to do with pornography? And she said, well, if you think about it, all of these guys now who we're in college with or who are younger, they have grown up on pornography on the internet. And I said, you're absolutely right. And she says, they think pornography is sex ed and they're watching it at a younger and younger age. Now
Right.
you go down to 10, 11, 12 years old. These guys, even if they're watching the most vanilla one man, one woman missionary position porn, they are getting their cues from that. And think about that. If they are watching this and they see these scenes hundreds and hundreds of times, even the most quote unquote normal, middle America pornography is a man being the aggressor. It's him being the one on top. He is saying horrible things to the woman. He's holding her down by her throat. She is submissive. He's bending her any way that he wants. That's not even to mention how absolutely degrading almost all of these film clips end. And the thing is, for those of us who have been in regular, normal relationships with other people, we are old enough and smart enough and experienced enough to recognize that pornography is fiction. It's not a reality show. It's not a
Right.
documentary. It is 100% fiction. But a 12 or 13-year-old boy doesn't realize that. And if they continue to keep watching and keep watching and keep watching, by the time that they are in college, when many men lose their virginity, well, the first thing that they're going to do is go back to this pornography, as not only this woman, but a lot of the others started explaining to me. And I had half this room telling me that, yeah, they didn't like to be with virgin men because these virgin men took all of their cues from pornography, and these women didn't want to retrain them. And that absolutely blew my mind because here, forget about addiction for a second. Here is where the root of the problem is that these young guys are watching this stuff and they're not learning anything about real life. They're
Right.
watching a fantasy. They might as well, be watching a Die Hard to become a police officer, or something else that's watching a sports movie, thinking they can become an athlete. This is a fiction, and they don't realize it. And these women don't want to be with them. So what happens when these women don't want to be with them? That's when you get these groups that pop up that are anti-woman, young guys who think that women are out to get them. That's where you get these different groups that are all about just no fap and being on your own and living a life with pornography, and that's where you get a lot of pornography addicts. uh, I know that um, if you think about young men, 13, 14 years old, they don't want to become porn addicts. They want a girlfriend. But
Right.
if you're 13 and 14 years old, odds are you don't have a girlfriend. Odds are you aren't sexually active, which is a good thing.
Mhm.
But you'll take what you can get at that moment. And what you can get at that moment is what's on this little porn computer that we give everybody.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they'll go with that in the moment. And they end up unhealthy because they keep going with that. Now, how do we combat this? How do we get these 12, 13-year-old, mostly boys, to recognize that not only is this a fiction, but this could lead to addiction, and it leads to a problem in 1 out of 3 of them once they become young men. And I think that answer is by talking about porn-induced erectile dysfunction, PIED. And this is essentially the condition where a man has watched, or a male has watched so much pornography that he cannot function normally sexually, whether that is getting an erection or whether that's finishing. And I do a coaching side of the stuff I do with men and women. And last year I had a 22-year-old guy. I'll call him Brian, even though not his real name, and he doesn't want to
Mhm.
appear on podcasts with his story. But
Oh.
well, I'll call him Brian. And he had a girlfriend named Whitney. He was 22, she's 20. And when he contacted me, one of the things that he had an issue with was PIED, again, porn induced erectile dysfunction, where if they were going to have intercourse, they had to have pornography playing in the room. And because that's the only way he could finish. He would not, if it was just him and her, nothing happened. So he had to have pornography on the TV over her shoulder, or their laptop on the nightstand, and that's the only way that he could do it. Eventually, Whitney came up with this idea that they could make they could make it work together without the outside pornography. But what they had to do was Brian would be in the bedroom, she would be in their living room, and then through FaceTime or Zoom or a Skype, I don't know what they used exactly,
Mhm.
they would have essentially a pornographic sexting session back and forth, even though they were in the same apartment.
Wow.
And Brian's mind, it told him, because he was looking at a screen, that he was looking at pornography. Even though it was Whitney, his girlfriend, on the screen, it told him that that was pornography, so he could get aroused to it. And then when he was close to the moment that he could finish, she would come running in from the other room, and they would finish like quote unquote regular people. And they were working at, and he was working at trying to change this. But it was really quite sad, because here he is, a 22-year-old guy in this position. She worked or she was learning to be a nurse, and she
Mhm.
worked and volunteered in healthcare. So she understood addiction a little more than some people and was very compassionate about it. But the fact was, if they wanted to have a baby, they would have had to have pornography playing in the room where that baby was conceived. And that's crazy, especially when you think of how young they are. And I think if we
Right.
tell stories like this to our 13 and 14-year-old boys, that may give them some pause. Because here's the story: if you look at too much pornography, your penis can break, because that's what happened to Brian. Essentially, his penis broke. And these 13-year-old boys, they don't want to become porn addicts. They want to be with women. And if they're told, listen, if you can't perform like a normal, healthy man, you may not be able to be in relationships with normal, healthy men. I mean, Whitney, she was a saint and a half, and, cute as a
Yeah.
button, and so smart as a whip, the kind of girlfriend that, any young man would like to have. But who knows if she would stick around, and how long she would stick around if that was going to continue to happen. So I think that we use a lot of shaming, we use a lot of embarrassing, we use a lot of these things when we talk to kids about pornography, if we talk at all currently. And what we need to do is we need to talk a little bit more about the science. We need to remove the shaming. And I think that when we talk about pornography to kids, I think that it needs to start young, it can be very age appropriate. You don't even need to bring the word pornography up. Just start to, if you see some pictures of adults that, don't have their clothes on and, are kissing and stuff, just let me know. Much like if you find a cigarette that's on the
Right.
ground, let me know. Or if you see somebody with a bottle of beer and they leave it there, you don't take a sip. I don't think that our pornography conversation with our children is a birds and the bees conversation. I think it is the stay away from harmful things conversation. And I think that we can remove a lot of the stigma, not just for the kids, but also for the parents, if
Right.
we can frame it that way. It you and I have been talking about pornography now for 15, 20 minutes, and we haven't talked about the content of it once. We haven't talked about what's on the screen or what's in
Right.
the pictures, because you don't have to. All
Right.
you have to do is, speak in broad brush terms. And that's what we need to start doing as a society, because the internet is so pervasive. It's in everybody's home, it's in everybody's pocket. There are 4 billion smartphones in this world. That doesn't even speak to tablets, desktop, laptop, every other way we get on the internet. Just
Yeah.
4 billion smartphones in the world. If you add up all the devices total, there's more than one device for every person on earth that can get to the internet. So obviously we need some tools for using this well. And I know that there are 100 other places the internet can take you down. I'm focusing on porn addiction because, as a former porn addict, I've been there. um, I think that we need to start talking to these kids, and we need to start being proactive as a society in having conversations about this.
Yeah.
Pornography is one of those things that it does scare a lot of people. It does bring up shame. It does bring up embarrassment. Pornography addresses all those crazy little places in the back of your head that you don't want to admit you have scratches that like to be itched. And you don't have to talk about that. That's not part of the conversation, really. It's just that we have this substance out there, and we need to learn how to use it correctly or not use it at all. And if somebody is educated to it, they can make the educated decision about it, especially if we remove the judgment and the shame from the conversation.
Hmm. I like that, like talking to kids in that format, just like we would about drugs or anything else, because
Well, exactly. And you can, and I talk to parents now and then, and a lot of times parents will just simply tell me, well, don't worry, we have filters on the phones. And it's like, like I said, there's 4
right.
billion phones in this world. Congratulations on locking one down. I mean, it's like when I was growing up, and my parents didn't have filters. The cable company's filter was the scrambled porn.
Mhm.
That's the closest thing to a filter I ever had. And reality, though, is what happens when you send your two kids, 10 and 11 years old, to school, and they're waiting at the bus stop, and one of their friends whips out
Friends,
their phone
right.
to show them
Yeah.
the latest garbage that Pornhub has put up. What are your kids going to do to react when you take away the filters that you think are protecting your kids and might be protecting them under your roof? What are they going to do? What are they going to say when somebody else introduces them to pornography? Because
Yeah.
I don't care if you have your kids in the most religious, conservative, right wing, locked down school, they are going to see pornography, and you need to prepare them for it. And simply putting up filters is not a way for them to learn how to deal with it and learn what it can or cannot be.
Hmm. And you're what leads to, like, for women, what do you suggest?
Well, are you talking about women who are porn addicts or women who are partners of addicts?
Women, just, I guess, looking at like the what happens like with the aggression
Yeah,
from
well, I mean, ultimately, it's one of
people.
these things where the guy either gets retaught what is right or what is wrong, because I mean there are, the two male fantasies that pop up in the younger groups statistically again and again are, I want to have a three-way exchange, or I want to have anal sex. And in less than a quarter of women experience either of those things in their life or will allow either of those things to happen. But if you look at pornography, if you look at the message it sends or the expectations it sends, every guy can ask this of their women, and 99% of the women will say yes. And that's not reality. And I think
Mhm.
that women need to continue to create boundaries, continue to say no. I think that this young group of women that I was talking with, unfortunately, I think a lot of it does end up on their shoulders because these guys' parents failed them. Society has failed everybody. If
Right.
these guys are if these guys, whether they're porn addicts or not, are going to end up in a real healthy relationship, they're going to have to learn how somewhere. And unfortunately, it's on the shoulders of these young women to largely teach these man boys what is correct, what is not, what is fiction, what is not. That's why, I think that health classes in middle school and high school, they talk about alcohol, they talk about drugs, they talk about all kinds of positive and negative behaviors that can lead to different places in your life. And I think that if we had one day where they talked about pornography addiction, and again, not getting into details about what the pornography is, but just accepting the fact that there are these pictures and there are these videos out there that, frankly, if you're under 40 years old, the vast majority are looking at, both men and women.
Right.
Um, so we know, largely everybody's using it, but nobody's talking about it. When you're talking about those younger age groups, we need to teach them the right way to use it. And burying our heads in the sand or saying no, this isn't something we can talk about is stupid. That's how we ended up with the opioid crisis. In the 1980s, when Nancy Reagan was preaching to people like you and me to just say no,
Mhm.
um, drug users were kind of seen as gross people, or people from the wrong side of the tracks, the lower socioeconomic types who you didn't want to really talk to because they were gross and they used that
Right.
stuff because they were bad people. Bad people use drugs. That's what we learned in the 80s. And you can go back and look at cop shows in the 60s, they're
Mhm.
talking about heroin. You can go back to rap music in the
Mhm.
80s, they're talking about abusing Vicodin. It's not like we couldn't see the opioid crisis coming, but because we as a society decided that these people were less than, we ignored it. And now before COVID happened, every other politician was all opiate crisis, because it's a great buzzword. But you're 30 years too early 90s when we identified the problem.
Right.
And we were not proactive as a society when it came to the opiate and opioid crisis. That was right in front of our faces for decades. And I'm trying to do this with pornography now, saying, yeah, I know that there is a certain amount of Vicodin you can take before you die. There's a certain amount of heroin you can take and then you die. I don't know of a certain amount of porn you can take and then you die, but we are talking about an unhealthy sexual society. And sex is one of the most basic instincts, basic functions that we have as human beings. It's why the species is here. It's why it continues to be here. But sex is just as much what happens between your ears as what happens between your legs. And pornography is poisoning what's happening to people's brains. And we need to start addressing it. We need to be proactive, because 30 years from now, if half the men under 50 are porn addicts and a quarter of the women under 50 are porn addicts, my God, that's going to make alcoholism look like nothing. That's going to make so many of our other problems look like nothing. And at that point, we'll have our politicians go, well, we need to talk about this sexuality problem. Look how it
Right.
just sprung itself up upon us. And I was like, no, it's here. It's been here. We need to deal with this. We now know what 20 years of internet use, being raised on it, can do to a kid. I mentioned to you before we started recording, I had to hope that we found a magazine in the woods when I was 12 years old if I wanted pornography.
Right.
Or, one of the greatest days of my life after I'd entered addiction was when I was 15 years old and I found a video store that would rent movies to me, that adult movies to me. Well, that's because I got my hands on them. I had access. Everybody has access these days, and
Right.
we don't want to address it. We're not doing anything different with our porn addiction in 2020 that we were doing in 1990. And that can't happen because of how technology has advanced, as how society is kind of letting these kids raise themselves these days. And we're still afraid to talk about sex as a society, and we're afraid to address these issues as a society, and that has to stop. And we can't wait for our politicians to wake up in 30 years and get to this. We have to start dealing with this as parents. We have to start dealing with this as members of society. It's too bad that in 2020 you do need to talk to pornography. You do need to talk to your kids about pornography, but in the 1950s, you had to teach them air raid drills and hide under a desk because nuclear war was coming.
Right.
Times change, and we now find ourselves in a time where education about pornography use needs to be in the tool belt of every parent and every educator, and frankly, every adult who is part of our society.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Because our whole world is changing.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, our world is changing faster than we can change. And that's what I think a lot of people miss, is that, assuming evolution is still happening to us, well, geez, look back 100 years at all of the technology, all of the changes in our
Mhm.
world, how we communicate, the ease of communication, how we can get around the world, how we can share ideas. Well, 100 years is only 3, 4 generations. And we know
Right.
scientifically it takes dozens and dozens of generations to see the smallest mutations of change. It takes hundreds of generations to see massive evolutionary change. The world is moving faster than our heads can keep up. Our little monkey brains are not quite equipped to deal with technology at the rapidly changing rate it is. So we need to stop, and we need to take assessments of things that are happening, and not just have knee-jerk reactions to things. We still have the caveman mind of what sex is, and we have the Puritan 1600s mind of, oh, don't talk about this stuff is bad for you, and you'll
Mhm.
go to hell if if anybody ever sees you naked. And the reality is, people have always been behaving differently behind closed doors when it comes to sexuality than when what we show in society. The fact is, we're all here because of sex. All of our parents had sex. All of portrayed themselves. We portray ourselves different in society now, as we did 30 years ago, as we will in 30 years from now. Every generation has its own pop culture, has its own cultural norms, but this is, just simple human sexuality. It makes sense that people are curious slash interested in pornography. I don't think there's anything abnormal about that, but it's one of these things where, again, I go back to it again and again and again. We need to teach um, what it is that we're looking at, why we're looking at it, how to most safely look at it, and then people have to make their own decisions. I think that I can't tell. My daughter's 21 years old now. I can't tell her to not have alcohol. She's an adult. She can make her own decision. When my son turns 18, I have hopefully taught him not to smoke cigarettes, and I wouldn't allow him to smoke cigarettes in my house.
Right.
But when he turns 18, he can now legally buy them. Hopefully, I have taught them well that whether if it's something like alcohol, they use it very wisely, or if it's something like cigarettes, they know not to use it at all. But ultimately, they're adults; they can make the decision. I've done the best I can, because I was an addict, because I was going through this while they were in the house. I did teach them a bit about pornography. They do know my story. They do know that I come on shows like yours, and I've
Mhm.
written my books. So I think they have a leg up over a lot of people their
Right.
age. Uh, but it needs to start being part of what we talk about. And uh, it they're going to make their own decisions, but I can equip them with good information while they are young. And I think that perhaps if my parents had equipped me with good decision making or the tools to decide well, maybe I would have never become a porn addict. I never became a heroin addict. I never became a gambling addict. I never became a food addict. Maybe because my parents warned me about these things, I didn't become that. Maybe because school warned me about these things, I
Right.
didn't become that. Maybe because these things are talked about on television as negatives, I didn't become those things. So I think that if society can start to play a proactive role in talking about pornography, in talking about what leads to pornography addiction. Heck, if we can cut these numbers in half, that would be huge. It's still horrible to think of 15% of guys under 30 being addicted to pornography. That's still way too much, but we've got to do something to impact these numbers. And I feel horrible for the people who are 30 because I think unless they do one-on-one therapy, very, intense therapy to figure out what kind of trauma they're dealing with, since most porn addicts are just victims of unresolved trauma. I think that you know I don't want to say they're a lost generation because
Yeah.
I had the problem. I got the help. I've been clean now for nearly 7 years. But if we can create a society where they don't even need the rehab. They don't even need
Right.
the therapy. We're going to be ahead of ourselves. We're going to be doing better here. We're going to be able to deal with other problems because sex is such a, like I said, a massive component to our world and our society.
Right.
If it is an unhealthy sexual world, it's very likely going to be an unhealthy society.
Yeah. Unhealthy families, unhealthy.
Well, that's exactly it. We know that addiction can carry down. We know that addiction, people, it gets rubbed off from witnessing it around you. If you've got 3 or 4 friends who are addicts, it's very easy for you to fall into that as well, more than somebody who's around people who aren't addicts. Um, I remember when I was one of the big moments for me when I was a teenager. Um, and I was already into my addiction at this point. I was on the soccer team in high school, and I think we must have been sophomores or juniors. And a bunch of us went over to a friend's house after school, and somebody popped a VHS tape of porn in the VCR. And I could tell this was the first time I ever really recognized I watched and used pornography different than other people. I believe I've been an
Oh,
addict going back to the age of 12. And here I am, 16, 17, and these guys are sitting around watching it like it's Mystery Science Theater 3000 and making jokes towards the screen and having a great old time. And I'm having a very different reaction off to the side. That's when I realized I didn't use it the same as my friends. This was
mhm.
something different for me. Maybe it's like a gambling addict. If you bring them to
Right.
somebody's house to play poker, they fiend far more than the rest of us who are just playing recreationally and for fun. That's kind of the way I felt, and that's how I knew that I was different. And every day there are thousands of kids in this world who are recognizing they're different or who are using pornography as a
Right.
crutch. And despite the fact that we've come so far in 30 years, there isn't anybody there for the most part to reach out and counsel that kid. And we still have this message in society that you need to be ashamed of this, you should be hiding this. So this kid who is looking at this porn, and for some reason, like I couldn't explain why it made me feel better. I couldn't explain. I don't think it had very much to do with what I saw on the screen. I learned later on about how it talked to my control issues. It was a way of escape. It was fantasy, all that. But a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid doesn't recognize why that's happening. All
Yeah.
they realize is that they're different and that society, despite the fact everybody's using it, society pretends or acts like pornography is for perverts and gross people. And that can actually leave some scarring, and that can make them not seek help, that can make them not talk to people
Right.
because
Yeah.
they feel they're going to be judged. And that's those these are the things that we need to think about, these are the things that we need to talk about. um, People ask me, well, what is pornography? What is it really? What counts as pornography? And I said, we can all agree that there is this, I don't want to say substance, but there is this material out there that is pornographic. It is the hardcore stuff of naked people having sex. It is the stuff that there are special stores for that don't let people
Mm.
under 18 into. We know that, we know that there are those cable channels way deep in the, number channel 783 with, you don't even want to say the names of the titles of the movies out
Right.
loud because they're embarrassing. We can agree that that is pornography. However, I believe that pornography is anything that can be used as a visual aid in sexual stimulation or in sexual arousal. And the reality is, for somebody like me, um, women in lingerie never did anything for me. Nothing interesting about that. Didn't care about those pictures. Don't care about the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, and I especially didn't care about the Victoria's Secret catalogs. That
Oh,
just that didn't scratch whatever itch I had. So to me, I'm sure you remember back 10, 15 years ago, Victoria's Secret would send a freaking catalog every day, it seemed like. And I had, my wife here, I had my daughter when she was a teenager, they were both getting these catalogs. So to me, Victoria's Secret catalogs are junk mail that clog up the house. But I know that there are a lot of guys who absolutely love looking at women in lingerie. That's their thing. That's their go-to. So is a Victoria's Secret catalog pornography or is it not? Well, for me, it certainly wasn't, but for these guys, it could
other
be.
people. Right.
These guys can look at there are guys who can look at, women's magazines like Cosmo, and that can be pornography. You talk about all the fetishes out there. Somebody who's a foot fetishist can look at feet and get sexually aroused. Is that pornography if they're looking at pictures of people's bare feet? Well, yeah, technically it is because it's a visual aid being used for arousal of the sexual variety. And I think that's what we need to do is start to recognize that it's not just this triple X rated stuff that is
Hmm.
pornography. Somebody can be watching a video of National Geographic and it can be pornography. It shouldn't be. For 98% of us, it's not, but
Right. So,
2% of people can watch that stuff, and it is. So there needs to be an overall understanding for people about what pornography is, uh, aside from just that heavy duty sexually drenched material
mhm.
that most of us do stay away from. Um, and the fact is there anything worse about that than there is for the guy who's the foot fetishist or the guy who's looking at the National Geographic or the Victoria's Secret catalog? Not really. It's a means to an end, and you get what you need there. And these are the places where I think things get a little bit murky for a lot of people. And that's again why we need education out there in this world. You may think that you are uh, porn proofing your house, but there's a
You're not.
channel on there's a channel on TV that has people in bathing suits, and your 14-year-old boy, that's enough for him. Or there's a ESPN is showing weightlifting competitions, and that's enough for a woman in the house to become aroused and watch things for it. And it's also important to stress it does go both ways. It's men and it's women and it's all
Mhm.
kinds of people. I did rehab for my sex and porn addiction, and I met people of every age, from 18
Um,
years old up until their 70s. I met men and women. I met people who were some of the stupidest people on earth and some of the smartest brains I could never touch. Rich people, poor people, it doesn't matter the color, the religion.
right.
Anybody can be a pornography addict. That's one of the things that I don't think society recognizes. We have this picture of a 19-year-old guy who lives in his mom's basement and has never kissed a girl in real life. And he's the pervert who's looking at porn 24/7. And I'm sure those guys are out there, but here I owned two companies. I was on my city council in my town. I had a lot going for me, but because I had these demons of unresolved trauma from abuse I had when I was young, um, I was a porn addict. And it's amazing how many are out there. And it isn't just the straight white men. If you look at statistics
Mhm.
about different groups that are starting to report higher rates of pornography addiction, straight white men, it is off the charts with us. But the numbers of bisexual people, both men and women, that are starting to report porn addiction is huge. The amount of white women who are starting to report porn addiction is going up. The amount of black men, members of the LDS Church, members of the Catholic Church, all of these groups are starting to report above normal or above the average statistics that they are becoming addicted to pornography. And I believe, again, this goes back to ease of use. You were not going to find a very religious person walking into an adult bookstore. You were not going to find a woman standing at the newsstand thumbing through the magazines, the adult magazines, for fear someone would see her. But now that the internet can bring all this stuff to our house, and now that it doesn't cost nearly as much to produce pornography or distribute pornography, the people who make pornography can still turn a profit and have it be hyper local. I can create, I can be in business to create pornography for, gay Asian amputees. And there's going to be a market for it out there that will find it on the internet. And there may only be 100 people in the world who are into this genre, but I can produce it for them because it costs almost nothing to produce. It costs nothing to put it up online. In the
Yeah.
past, you had to create them. You had to hire a ton of actors. You had to have a big production. You had to find a theater back in the 70s and 80s to put your pornography movie into. It cost a lot of money to produce and distribute porn 30 years ago. That's why they geared it towards the straight white guy, because they knew that was an audience they could count on. Well, these days, like I said, you can narrowcast. If somebody wants a specific race, if somebody wants a certain genre of, porn, if somebody wants a certain, uh, whatever whatever their little proclivity is, they can find it online now. You look at some
Yeah.
porn sites and all the different genres they have. I mean, you want somebody in a cheerleading outfit, you can get that. You want somebody in a Harry Potter outfit, you can get that. It's ridiculous how many genres of it there is today, and it's because it's so much cheaper to produce, and that's bringing, and so much cheaper to distribute. So we have people who otherwise would not have been interested in what was produced for the straight white guy of 1983, and who now are watching pornography on their laptops or on their phones, and they're watching stuff that's geared towards them. There are genres now, and I think it's kind of funny, but there's this genre of ethical pornography where
Oh.
they don't show aggression towards women, and everything is, nice, and people talk polite. It's all PC, but at the core it's still porn. But
Mhm.
there are people out there who are watching this ethical pornography who feel better about themselves because finally they found a genre that isn't nasty towards women, or doesn't have cuss words, and isn't misogynistic. And that's great, but at the end of the day, it is still 100% objectification, because that's what pornography is. Porn is 100% objectification. I don't care what kind of neat bow you wrap it into. I don't care who you target it towards as far as a demographic. It essentially reduces people to a bag of body parts and to just be gawked at for pleasure. And people can make their own decision whether that's moral, whether that's ethical, but that is porn in a nutshell. And there are too many people who are becoming addicted to this, that we need to do something.
Wow. That's intense. So it could really be anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And because, well, look, and addiction is addiction is addiction. While, like I said, you do too much heroin, you die. You gamble too much, you lose your house. You eat too much, you get heart disease. Well, I understand these are all different symptoms of addiction, but what's going on between the ears is largely the same thing. It's about your pleasure centers. It's about the dopamine and the serotonin and the oxytocin and all those fun little chemicals. And it's
Right.
why, and if you don't check your addiction, it's why the addiction becomes worse and worse, because you're just trying to get that same high. The person who once got drunk on 3 beers eventually builds that tolerance, not just physically, but mentally. And they then need 6 beers, or they need to move to
Right.
wine or to hard liquor. And before you know it, to get that same little buzz, they're giving themselves pancreatitis because they're drinking so much alcohol. Um, that's what we need to remember when it comes to porn addiction, is that the same thing is happening in the mind, and people
Hmm.
need to look at more. People need to look at more extreme stuff. I look, at when I was an addict, the last couple of years I was an addict, I was looking at, some really out there kind of stuff. I had to go into these other genres of porn. It wasn't just, one guy, one girl that did it for me. I needed to see some of this more extreme material, because that's the only way my mind could get there. I'm sure if I stuck with it, I probably would have ended up with some kind of erectile dysfunction, like the guy Brian, who I mentioned at the
Oh.
beginning. Thankfully, that never happened to me, but I could certainly see myself going down that road, because you hit a point where you've got to do something to get that same high. Addiction is horrible. I don't wish it on my worst enemy. Somebody asked me the other day, what does it feel like to be an addict? And it came out, and it seemed like it made sense to me. It's like putting on a heavy, wet fur coat and
Hmm.
walking out into a blizzard. You can't walk into a blizzard, and the blizzard kind of is life. You can't walk out into a blizzard not wearing a coat. You're going to freeze to death.
Right.
But you don't want to wear a fur coat that is soaking wet into a blizzard, because that can kill you too. Maybe it won't, maybe it will. Are you better with the coat? Are you better without? That's the problem with the addict. We have this heavy, wet coat on us, and we think it's the only way we're going to survive. We know it's not healthy. We know it's not good for us, but we can't see survival happening any other way. That's what the magnet is. I talk about this also in terms of being thirsty for water. Give it 2 or 3 hours, you're going to want some water. Now you
Right.
can hold off. You can hold off 20 minutes. You can hold off 30 minutes. Your thirst is going to get a little bit worse. Give it an hour or two, you're really getting thirsty. Well, we know you can go 2 days before your system starts to actually have negative effects by not drinking water. But your mind tells you after 3, 4 hours, you need water, and you satiate that thirst. Well, imagine that being addiction, because
Right.
pornography or whatever someone's addiction is, it's like that thirst. It's your mind telling you, okay, it's time, you need this stuff. Well, I can hold off a half hour. Sure, you can try. And a half hour later, it's worse. And 2 hours later, it's worse. And it's just that thirst that I need this substance, or you you go a day without water, you're going to be convincing yourself you're going to die. And that's kind of the way addiction feels. And when you tell somebody that it's time to go into recovery, or when they try to get into recovery, how do they live their lives without this? How do you live your life without water? How do you go out into the blizzard without something, excuse me, to protect you? It just seems like it's impossible. And it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation in the addict's mind. How do I live without the one thing that makes me happy, or the one thing that once made me happy, the one thing that alleviates my pain, my stress, my anxiety, whatever the negative things are in my life? This is the one thing I found. This is my crutch that makes me feel better. Of everything in the world I can do to deal with life on life's terms, this is the thing that helps me. And you want to take it away? I'm not going to survive. That's what goes through the addict's head. And it's difficult, because the addict is the one who has to do the heavy lifting. A therapist can tell me whatever they want, a psychiatrist can prescribe any medication they want, but it's me that needs to be in recovery. It's me that needs to do the hard work. And that is challenging when your mind for, I was a porn addict for 24 years. When your mind is screaming at you that you need this thing or you're going to die. And I know it sounds silly to people who don't experience addiction, but hopefully the thirst thing is a good enough analogy. You feel like, how could I survive without this thing? This thing is absolutely crucial to my life, to my survival, to my functioning. And that's why so many people end up going down that road. And so many people will not seek help, because addiction ends in one of five ways. And often it's a lot of, it's, well, for a lot of people, it's multiple things of these. You lose your friends, you lose your family, you lose your job, you lose your financial status, and or you get in trouble with the law. Those are
Mhm.
the five things that happen. After one of those or more than one of those five things happens, you have two routes. You either go to recovery and you get better, or you go to an early grave. That's really it. I mean, I wish that it was more complicated than that. But bad things happen, and then you either get better or you die. And this can take place over 1 year, or this can take place over 51 years, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it, and whether you're lucky or not. And sometimes I don't think luck is continuing on with things. I think that people need to understand that this is what addiction really is, and this is what addiction is for so many people, including pornography addiction, including video game addiction,
Yeah.
including some of these things that perhaps mainstream science, here in America, the DSM, which all of our professionals use as their diagnostic manual, still doesn't have pornography or sex addiction in it. Thankfully, the World Health Organization has their ICD-11, which does have sexual impulse disorder. So we are moving towards a real diagnosis, but it's one of these things. Science is always behind. We like to think science is cutting edge, but science is always behind, and they're still studying this stuff, and they need to study
Right.
before they can, reach certain conclusions that will allow it to be included in the DSM. But meanwhile, there's a pandemic going on. Nobody's going to school. Nobody's going to work. Everybody's sitting in front of their computer, getting their minds absolutely bombarded with pornographic images.
Right.
I'm sorry that this diagnostic book that hasn't been updated for 10 years doesn't have this information in it, but we need to deal with this as professionals, as people in society, as parents. This is a problem that needs to be dealt with. It can't be ignored. It can't we can't bury our heads in the sand. We can't say it doesn't exist because a
Right.
bunch of guys in white lab coats around boardroom table have not decided to put it in their little book yet. We can see with our own eyes what's happening in society. And while it is scary, while it is embarrassing, while it is for the user shameful, we need to start removing that stigma, and we need to start having these conversations. And I can't say that enough to people, is that we need to start having these conversations. We're never going to address porn addiction if we don't address pornography first.
Yeah. Do you think it's stopping people from getting treatment, that there's not a diagnosis?
I think that it's stopping some therapists from taking it as seriously as they should.
Okay.
I get a lot of email. I am a moderator on a board on Reddit regarding pornography, specifically dealing with the partners of porn addicts. Like I said, I work one-on-one with people, and I get just a lot of email and messages that there are so many therapists who are completely unable to address this from either an educational point of view or an emotional point of view. I mean, you know as well as I do how many quote unquote broken people get into the therapy field to try to help others, and it's a great thing. Both of the rehabs that I went to, half the people who worked there had the problem in the past. People who have these problems, hey, even myself, I'm now talking about this stuff to
Right.
people. I'm trying to help. That's what we do when we get better. We try to help. um, but if I go to a therapist who doesn't have experience with this, or maybe they have some kind of background where there's abuse and sexuality is part of it, they don't want to address it, they don't want to talk about it, you can I hear from people whose therapists, especially marriage therapists, who aren't familiar with addiction, aren't familiar with trauma. There are a lot of marriage therapists who are urging people to just have more sex, and that's one of the most dangerous things you can suggest. Or I've had partners contact me and say that when they're sitting there talking to a therapist, maybe it's cognitive behavioral or something that isn't in the realm of addiction or necessarily trauma, that they are told, well, it's just pornography, let your husband look at it, or maybe you're not giving him enough sex.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's that freaks me out that there are professionals saying this kind of stuff. And I know that there are professionals who need to keep the lights on, and they will act like they can take on any case in the world,
Mm.
because they need the copay to keep doing business. And I can certainly appreciate that as someone who was a businessman in the past. But I
Yeah.
do feel like that there are a lot of professionals who are ill-equipped to deal with this, who don't recognize it as the problem it is. I think that we know that uh, alcoholism or drug abuse, we've seen the ravages of it. It is mainstream for 40, 50 years. You go back to the 1920s and 30s, and alcoholism was seen as a personality disorder, and you were put into an asylum, if you or the mental hospitals if you exhibited alcoholism. We had Alcoholics Anonymous pop up in the 1930s, yet the DSM didn't address alcoholism until the 1960s and 70s, and it didn't remove the stigma of the personality disorder until the 1980s. Again, medicine is behind in these things. It's always behind because, and I
Mhm.
appreciate this, you need to have as much provable
Right.
evidence as
Yeah.
possible. I don't want you just giving me some random drug and saying, here you go, this is going to make you free of COVID, or this is going to make you, not ever want to overeat or do anything like that. I don't know what you're giving me. I've never heard of this thing. And, let's have lots of testing on it. Don't want you to use some kind of modality of therapy on me that is exactly what cult leaders are using on the people they're around, because that's not healthy for me either. We need to have
Right.
certain standards, but we also need to open up our eyes. For those of us who have almost never played video games, and I was never really a video game kid. Uh, I hear about video game addiction, and I met people in my rehabs who had it. And when I first got there, it was like, oh, are you really serious? You're here for video game addiction? I mean, what, Pac-Man just too much in your life? And I say that comically now, but you
Mhm.
sit there and you talk to them, it's like, geez, they're just like all of us, and they're
Right.
they're blowing 15 hours in front of the TV because they are getting the dopamine rush of being
Right.
successful doing little things. They're interacting with people through their headsets and having a social experience. And
Yeah.
because they may not have great social skills, they can't do that in real life. And suddenly it all makes sense. And I am now the last person to make fun of
Mhm.
video game addiction because I've talked to the people, I've learned about it. Uh, I hate to think that there are therapists out there who are like, well, then turn the TV off if you're addicted to video games. It's not
Right.
that
Not
simple.
that easy.
Yeah,
Right.
it's not that easy, and we need people to embrace it. We really need our therapeutic community to understand it's a real thing and embrace it. And we need those who are uncomfortable talking about it, or don't want to talk about it, or don't want to learn about it, to pass these clients on to people who are willing to talk about it. Because, like I said, it just gets me so angry when I'll get a message and my husband's been looking at pornography for 3 years. I keep asking him not to. I keep trying to set up boundaries, but I don't have the wherewithal to leave, or I don't have the resources to leave. And I've gone to a therapist now, and the therapist says, just live with it. Guys will be guys. And it's like, that's not a healthy relationship. That's not a healthy
Mhm.
sexuality. You are making the problem that much worse. And I just like I've been beating the drum, and I'll continue to beat the drum.
Yeah.
If we can talk about this, if we can normalize pornography as a topic because it's already normal in society. If normal and average means that more than 50% or more of people are engaged, well, under 50 years old, more than 50% of people, men and women, are engaged in pornography at least once a month. So we need to be able to talk about it. We need to make it a safe discussion. We need to make it a judgment-free discussion. You are not the pornography you look at. I don't care if you like looking at people having food fights with themselves. I don't care what it is you're looking at. I've probably seen it all myself. And we are not the porn that we look at. We don't need to describe the porn that we look at. We just need to accept that there is this thing that is out there that we are using as a society that we don't have the knowledge behind. And it can really mess up your life if you go down that road. I went down that road. I don't have either of those businesses anymore. Pornography really hurt my relationship with my wife and kids for many years. I got very ill. Like I said, I've had 2 different stints at inpatient rehab to get my head on straight. I had to go back and wade through the abuse that happened when I was a kid and really get through it and develop tools to stay away from pornography, especially in early recovery. I don't have that much of a problem with it anymore, but in early recovery, you've got to develop those tools. You've got to deal with the abuse. You've got to deal with the uh, uh, trauma. Patrick Carnes, who's the big guy in this field when it comes to research on sex and porn addiction, he did a study years and years ago and found something like 70% of men have been physically abused. 80% have been sexually abused, and like 95% have been mentally or emotionally abused who end up as porn addicts. So if you boil that down, between 90 and 94% of men who are porn addicts have some kind of trauma brought on by abuse, and that trauma hasn't been dealt with. Now it's 67% for alcohol with trauma. So trauma plays a big role in addictions. It plays an even bigger role in this particular addiction. We need to, and usually people run from trauma because it's shameful, it's embarrassing, it hurts, it's difficult. And me talking about the trauma that I had for the first time with therapists was hard, and remembering some of the stuff that happened to me was really, it made me sad, it made me angry, it made me frustrated, all of those things. But I did it and I got through to the other side, and I don't feel it as much. Addiction is a symptom of a bigger problem. If you deal with the bigger problem, that symptom, I don't want to say it takes care of itself, but the urges become less. Now that I've dealt with that trauma, now that I've worked my way through it, I don't need the pornography crutch nearly as much as I used to. And that's, I see these guys online in groups like NoFap and Red Pill and some of these others who are like, yeah, stay away from porn. I'm going to be a superstar. I was addicted to porn and now I'm never going to touch it. These guys go a week or two and then they're right back at it, or they go a month or two or right back at it because they don't deal with the underlying problems. And that's what people, hopefully who are listening to us now recognize, is you have to deal with the underlying problems. You can put a Band-Aid on a wound. It doesn't make the wound better. It just covers it. And pornography is that Band-Aid for a lot of men dealing with the wound of trauma. And unfortunately, you got to take that Band-Aid off and you got to get into the wound and you got to clean the wound and you got to heal the wound. Because if you just throw a Band-Aid on, that wound may never be healed, especially if it is infected. That's just that's just the way it is, and we need to accept the fact it's the wound that needs to be healed. It's not about putting a Band-Aid on top of it or dealing with just the Band-Aid. I don't need Band-Aids anymore. Well, okay, fine. You don't need pornography anymore. You've still got this wound. Well, you've still got this trauma, so you do need to deal with it. And that's where I wish a lot of people would understand more of the therapeutic side of it.
There's something really scary that, so I've heard about different facilities. They have people that are in these facilities and they're actually giving them porn.
Yeah, no, I've heard of these too.
And that's really concerning. I thought it was very concerning, but now after talking with you, I really think it's extremely concerning.
Well, but
more than ever.
but that's it. It's like, okay, and I've heard this being used with certain types of sexual crimes as well.
Right.
Can
Yep.
we have,
Exactly.
will you stop raping women if we give you pornography?
Right.
And the thing is, at this point, there is no medical link between pornography and sexual abuse when it comes to people using it. There's no link between pornography and child abuse. There's no link between these things right now. We can say there might be, and I'm certain,
Right.
that people use them across, but pornography is it's not the cause of these things, and it's not the solution to these things. It
Right.
is on its own little island. It's an island that a lot of us are standing on and pretending that none of us are there, and none of us know how to navigate the island. And that's what we need to really learn to do. And doing things like putting it in a basket with, people who are
Right.
sexual abusers are all porn addicts. Well, that's not true, actually. It's like
No.
it's like when you say people who are sexual abusers, you see all of these different city councils and states said, oh,
Mhm.
you can't be within 1,000 feet of a school or 1,000 feet of a church because you might, reoffend. Yet all the statistics say that these people, it has nothing to do with proximity to children. It has to do with they, almost everybody who abuses a child knows the child that they are abusing, that
Personal.
they've spent
Right.
time grooming the child, and it has nothing to do with where they live. But as society, what do? Move 1,000 feet away from the school. That it,
Yeah.
it it sounds good on paper. It makes it for the politicians can say they're doing something about it, but it's not actually making any difference whatsoever. And that's one of my big frustrations is that um, much like people not looking at the science when it comes to the pandemic, I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, science. And I don't
Mhm.
care, whether you are a super religious, anti-pornography, I hate the nude body, or I don't care if you're the freest love, let's have sex every day with people I hook up with type person. Pornography will affect both of you. Pornography can affect both of you. Let's look at the science of this. That's where
Mhm.
this needs to lie. It's not within the judgment. We need to
Right.
create safe conversations in society. We need to create judgment free conversations in society. I don't need somebody telling me, some super conservative person telling me that I'm a bad person because I look at pornography and, I'm not going to get to heaven this way. And I don't need some free swinging sexually open person to be like, there's no problem with pornography. It allows
Right.
you to, it allows you to discover who you are. Well, that's not true either. You're just as wrong as that other person. There needs to be some level of agreement. And to me, that agreement is where science is. And that's why we can look at a lot of the science behind this. And that's why it frustrates me that the DSM doesn't have this in there yet, because I have I've met very few therapists who deal with people who have porn addictions or deal
Mhm.
with addictions and don't agree or disagree that porn addiction is a real thing. There are like I said, there are the therapists who are just uneducated and think they can deal with it, and there are a few who flat out say pornography addiction isn't a real thing. It doesn't meet the criteria of addiction, and it's this, and this. Well, a lot of times you'll find that those are the ones who have written books or developed programs that are different and are just trying to make money.
Right.
And that, I always urge people, make sure whoever you get help from, make sure you know what book they've written or what philosophy they espouse, because they may just be trying to sell you a book or a program, which, hey, welcome to America, that's what we do. But that's an important, distinction
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
make. I am not. I still am not. Let's ban pornography. I know scientifically there are people who can look at it that they cannot develop problems. I
Right.
don't think it's necessarily a good thing, but I don't think when I go to a casino and play slot machines twice a year it's necessarily a good thing. I just think it's not a harmful thing in my case.
Right.
I don't carry the gambling gene. I know how to walk away if I've won $30 or lost
Mhm.
$30. But I can see people there who are addicts, and I can understand how you can become an addict to gambling
Right.
easily. I have to watch myself. but I see it. But I don't want the fact that somebody at the roulette table who has a problem causes gambling to get outlawed, because they have an issue that most of us don't have. Most of us are not addicts with pornography, so I don't think that pornography for freedom purposes should be banned. It is legal, and I don't think that there's I don't think there's going back on that, because you can go into caves from ancient Phoenicia, and cavemen painted pornographic images on the cave walls. And you go into a fine arts museum, and Boston Museum of Fine Art, you look at some of their Egyptian pottery, and there is some pretty X-rated stuff painted on the side of it. Pornography's been around forever. It's always going to be around forever, but we need to look at our relationship with it and where we are in today's society with the technology that we have, with what we know about 20 to 30 years of internet use has caused to the younger generations, and we need to act accordingly. And that's really what I'm out there saying, is that I think I might not have been a porn addict had there been education around it. And it makes me incredibly sad, the fact that I'm now a 44-year-old man, and most parents are still dealing with pornography the way they did when I was a 14-year-old boy. That needs to stop. That needs to change, or we're going to continue going down this horrible road in society.
Well, thank you so much for sharing everything. And
Thank you so much for giving me
right.
this time. I appreciate being able to talk to the people who watch and listen to this show, and hopefully, if any of you listening think you have a problem, get it taken care of. Go get some help for it. It's only going to get worse. That's what happens with addiction. It gets worse and worse.
Yeah.
And sometimes people switch addictions to something else. Just because you go from porn to caffeine, or you go from porn to gambling, doesn't make it any better. You're still a very ill person when it comes to your addictions and why you're doing it. Nothing got cleared because you switched addictions. Get your addictions taken care of. I don't care what kind they are. Get help before it gets too late. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help. That's probably the bravest, strongest thing you can do. And I now, at 44 years old, I am so much happier. I am so much healthier physically, mentally, spiritually than I ever was in almost any other part of my life. And if I, after 24 years, can get to this point of recovery, anybody can. So, if people have any questions, they want to know about my books, if they want to get in touch with me, check out my website. It's recoveringpornaddict.com. I'm happy to help anybody out there. There are a lot, I write articles every week about recovery or addiction. There are a lot of resources on those pages. So, come check it out if you want to learn more, if you think you need to learn more about this, whether you're the addict, whether you're the loved one of an addict, or you just want to learn more because it's going to be an issue in society. Like I said, check out recoveringpornaddict.com. It's a good jumping off place.
Yeah, and the book is really good too. I read the book.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I always tell people that they make great stocking stuffers, but they don't. They're. It's really not an appropriate gift to give as a stocking stuffer. But I still think that you can buy it and leave it laying around and let people discover it. And,
yeah, and it's good for therapists to get educated in this too. So,
exactly. And that's I'm never going to be an academic. I'm never going to be a therapist, but I went through this and I've done more research than anybody I know. And I think that people just need some knowledge. It doesn't matter who you are. We need some knowledge about this. And, I thank you for exposing me to your audience, because there are a lot of people who are still scared to death to talk about this.
Right.
There
like
are
when
more.
I mentioned this to some people, they're like, "What?"
Yeah. Well, because there are a lot of people, and I don't want to castigate them, but I bet they look at porn every day, but they're afraid if they say the P word out loud that it sounds like an endorsement. If you say, well, I had a conversation about pornography addiction with somebody. What? You talk about
Yeah.
pornography? Yeah, because it's out there. And you know what? You and I can talk about heroin addiction. Doesn't make me a heroin user. And in
Right.
fact, I should probably know about heroin use. I should probably know about meth use because it's out there in society. And we need to, we need to not be afraid to say the word pornography. We need to not be afraid to talk about it. I don't care what you look at. Nobody cares what you look at. Nobody wants to hear what you look at, but we can still talk about it as a society. And looking at statistics, we need to accept that it is more frequent than not that people look at it and stop pretending that it's just that random pervert who looks at it, because we know that's not true anymore. And the quicker we get over ourselves and the quicker we accept this, the quicker we'll move to a healthier society. So, again, thank you for giving me access to your audience, because not everybody is willing to do that.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I think it's an important topic. So,
I hope more people
yeah,
move in that direction. So, again, thank you so very much.
thank you.